Hey guys, so today we're going to be looking at how to solve quadratics by factorization. Now there's lots of different types of quadratics that you could be asked, and there's actually four main types, and we're going to look at how to solve each one. But to start with, when we're looking at a quadratic, which is anything which has this x squared term, we're going to be doing this same step for all the types, which is getting every term to the left-hand side, and we're going to leave the right-hand side as 0, as you can see in this example. Now, by doing that, what we can then do with the quadratic is we can factorize it and then find out what values of x will make that left side equal 0, which is the right side, and that's what you're trying to do. So let's go through the four main types and see how you can do it. Now with this first example, I've written this same quadratic in two different ways, because with this particular type, you can probably see that if we have x squared equals 25, a simple way to solve it would just be to square root it. So in this case, you don't need to make the left-hand side equal 0, but you do need to remember that when we square root it, we need to do a plus minus, because it could have been a negative number that was squared to give what we had on this side. So we're going to get x equals plus minus 5, because we know that minus 5 squared is also 25. So that's our one exception to the rule of getting everything to the left-hand side. But if we do want to get everything to the left-hand side, which we'll be doing for the rest of the types of questions, we can do this. We've got x squared minus 25, and we make sure that this x squared term is positive, always positive. That's how you know what side to take each term. Once we've done that, we can see here that we've got a difference of two squares. So this is when you get an x squared and a number that are minus in each other. When we get this, we can now use difference of two squares to form two brackets. And we know that in the first part of each bracket, we have the x, because that's the square root of x squared. And in the second part of each bracket, we have the square root of 25, which is 5. And we know that because it's difference of two squares, we put a plus in one of them and a minus in the other one. And it doesn't matter which order you do that. Now that we've factorized this quadratic, what we can easily see is what we need to make x equal to in each bracket to make this whole left side equal 0, which is the right side. For this particular bracket, we need to make this equal 0. If we make this one bracket 0, we know that no matter what is in this bracket, it doesn't matter, because the whole side is going to equal 0, because it would be 0 times any number here, which will equal 0, which is what we're trying to do. So if we can make this bracket 0 or this bracket 0, we've got a solution. So let's make x plus 5 equals 0. And let's make x minus 5 equals 0, both of which will give a solution. So how do we solve this first one? Well, we use inverse equations, and because it's plus 5, we minus 5 to the other side. So x equals negative 5, and over here we do the same thing, but in this time it's minus 5, so we'll plus 5 to the other side. So we get x equals 5, and there are our two solutions. So that's when you get a quadratic that has an x squared and a number and nothing else. Now let's look at the next type of example. Now here we don't have a number, we have a term that has x squared and x. Now remember, our first step for all these equations is to get everything to one side, and we want the x squared to be positive. So I'm going to take the 5x to this side, because x squared is already positive over here. If it was negative, I would be taking this over to that side. So I'm left with x squared minus 5x, because it was plus 5x there, and that equals 0. Great, that's how you always want to start the quadratic. The next thing you do is we can see that x is a common factor to both of these terms. So we can factorize the x out, and it is the highest common factor. There is no higher term that we could take out of both of these terms. So we can make it x, bracket, I want to get this whatever's in this bracket, I want to make sure it's the same as the above quadratic. So x times what gives x squared? X times x. And x times what gives minus 5x? X times minus 5 equals 0. Great, so now that we've factorized this quadratic, we can solve it by finding what values of x will make this whole left side equal 0, which is the right side. So if we make x on the outside equal 0, we can see that it will be 0 times anything on the inside, which in this case would be 0 times 0 minus 5, which is negative 5. And we know that 0 times negative 5 just equals 0. So that is a solution. So when you get x by itself on the outside of a bracket, x equals 0 is one of your solutions. The other solution, remember what we did before when we had these brackets, was we need to make the bracket equal 0. So next to it, I write x minus 5 equals 0 because I want the whole bracket to equal 0. And then we solve it by adding 5 to the other side. So we get x equals 5. So there are the two solutions. Great. Next, we're going to look at another example, the same thing. Again, because we want to be consistent and do the same thing every time, we're going to take everything to the side, to one side, making the x squared positive. You could do this without doing that, but because we want to do the same thing for every type of question, we'll just take both of these terms to the other side so that this is positive. So we pull that over here to make it a positive x squared, and we're going to take the 4x over as well to make it minus 4x. I'm just keeping everything on the left side to make it easier. It's actually on the right side, and I've just switched them around. Now what we do to solve it is we factorize. We can see that x is a common factor. So we take x. We want to get this back to the original equation here, which is x minus 4 equals 0. This is the same as this. It's just factorized, which is being put in brackets. Now, what x values are going to make this whole left side equal 0? Well, we can make x equal 0, or we can make x minus 4 equals 0. So to get rid of that, we are going to plus the 4 to the other side, which leaves x equals 4. So we get two answers here. There are two x values that will make this left side equal 0, which is the right side. Great, so there are our first two types of examples. The next two involve something a little bit trickier. Now we have x squared plus 5x plus 6. We have the x term and the number as well. We call these monic quadratics because the number in front of the x squared is 1, which we don't have to write. I'll write it there so you understand. So if we've got x squared plus 5x plus 6, we can't just take an x out here because the 6 doesn't have an x in it. So we can't just take a number out and factorize it like that. And we also can't do difference of two squares like we did with the first example. So what do you do for these types of quadratics where you have all three types of terms? Well, first of all, we make sure x squared is positive, and we make sure all the terms are on one side. And you want them in this order, with the x squared term first, the x term second, and the number third. What we then do is a process called the Psf method. And the Psf method is going to help us find the two numbers that go into our brackets here. So we are going to factorize this quadratic like this, but we need to find what goes in each part of the bracket. We know that the first part of the bracket, when we're dealing with monic quadratics, so when there's a 1 in front of that x squared, or just nothing because it's invisible, we know we can just put xx, because if we expanded this bracket, remember in expansion, it would be x squared. But how do I find what goes here and what goes here? Well, there's two numbers that are going to go in those spots. And to find those two numbers, which are called our factors, which is what the F stands for, I want to find what the two numbers multiply to, which is what P stands for, product. And I'll put that over here. And I also want to find what those two same numbers add to, which is their sum. And that could be a minus as well. Once I have two numbers that multiply to the same number, to the number that we want, and add to the number that we want, we know that they are the two numbers that go in here. So how do I know what number I want these two numbers to multiply to? Well, the p is given by this number at the end, which includes the sign, the +6. So that is our p. It's always the number that's by itself. We want two numbers that multiply to 6. We then want two numbers that add to 5. We don't include the x here. We just look at the number and the sign before it, which is 5. So what two numbers multiply to 6 and add to 5? Well, let's look at some examples. We could have 6 and 1, because they multiply to 6, but we know that 6 plus 1 equals 7, not 5. So they're not our two numbers. What about 3 and 2? Well, 3 times 2 equals 6, and 3 plus 2 equals 5. So that's what we want. So we know that 3 and 2 are our factors here, and that's positive 3 and positive 2. That means we write positive 3, positive 2. We simply put them into the other side of the bracket, and you've done the factorization. Now remember, this is only when it is an x squared quadratic. If there was a number there like 2 or 3, we have to do something different, which we'll be covering next. So what we do now is, how do we make these brackets equal 0? Well, we need either x plus 3 to equal 0. So we minus the 3 from that side to get x equals minus 3. Or we need x plus 2 to equal 0. So we do x plus 2 equals 0. And then using inverse equations to get rid of that 2, we minus the 2 from both sides to get x equals minus 2. So they are your two solutions. Those x values will make this whole thing equal 0, which is what we're trying to do. And that's how you solve it. Now I've got another example over here, which is b. Minus x squared plus 2x equals minus 3. Can you guess what we need to do first? Well, we need to get all the terms to one side, and we need to make sure that x squared is positive. So we're going to be taking everything over to this side, which I'll still write on the left-hand side. So if I take minus x squared over to the other side, I end up with x squared. If I take plus 2x to the other side, I get minus 2x, and minus 3 is still on that same side, so that doesn't change. So we make everything equal 0. Now, we go through the Psf method. Psf. We know we're trying to get this bracket, these brackets to equal 0. So what is our product? Well, our product is always the number term here, so it's minus 3. What is our sum? Minus 2. So what two numbers multiply to minus 3 and add to minus 2? Well, let's look at minus 3 times 1, because minus 3 and 1 are two factors of minus 3. So you always start with the product, then look at the sum. So you do this product part first, then look at the sum. We want to find all the factors that could go to minus 3. And now we look at minus 3 and 1, and that is minus 3 plus 1 will equal minus 2. And that's what we're trying to do there. Sorry about the bad 2. So we know that minus 3 and plus 1 are our two factors. So we write x, because it's a monic, there's a 1 there, so we know that goes straight to x squared. And then we write in minus 3 plus 1. It doesn't matter what order you do it. So our two solutions there are x minus 3 equals 0. I'll just move that up for you. To get rid of that, we take that to the other side and get x equals plus 3. And then we want x plus 1 to equal 0. And we want to minus the 1 off that side to get x equals minus 1. So that's how you get the two solutions. Now the last thing we're going to be looking at are the non-monic quadratics. And that's what we're going to cover in the next video.